Hi guys, it's been a while. Uh, I want to talk today, and I'm going to try and keep it very brief, about the Children's Act 1989, because there's some upcoming legislative changes to remove the presumption of contact, which I think is quite concerning. The Children's Act 1989, if you didn't know, is the core piece of legislation that governs contact arrangements in the UK family court, or the English family court, as well as a bunch of other things. It's got a welfare test on there in the legislation that considers the children's interests. But it's also got a presumption in there that it's in the child's interests to see both parents. Now, there's been a prolonged campaign to remove that presumption. And the long and the short of it is that the campaigners have said parents that are abusive shouldn't see the children because they don't think it's in the children's best interests. Now, I have an issue with this, and I know I might get some flack for this because people sort of think you're arguing that a child should be subject to various forms of physical harm, and the worst forms of abuse and all kinds of stuff were rolled out. But that's simply not true. My issue is that domestic abuse, by definition, at the moment, is so broad, it encompasses everything from raising your voice in an argument to, patterns of behaviour that are non-physical, all the way through to, sexual violence and beating people up to God knows what else. But it's the other end of the spectrum that I think is going to trip people up, because sending an email even can be classed as domestic abuse, and I don't think people realise that. Sending a text message, being in an argument and going a step too far can be classed as domestic abuse. Throwing a cup can be classed as domestic abuse. I don't know a woman alive, right, that hasn't got too upset in an argument and thrown something. There's men that do it. In fact, it's considered a trait in Latina women, where they throw things. But besides the point, the problem with this is that by just being human, you're not rational. Nobody is 100% rational. So what one person might think is normal behaviour, somebody else might not. So, it's very, very dangerous territory to be legislating that you shouldn't see your child because, of domestic abuse. If it's even true, because again, that's another issue, and I'm not going to make 5 minutes just because we're only just getting into it. But again, that's even if the allegation is true, because there are several issues at hand. One, LASPO removed the legal aid from family court cases, so men, and it is majority men, and I'm probably going to sound like an MRA here, but I'm just talking facts. Men generally don't have a solicitor unless they pay for it, whereas women, and it is majority women, go to the solicitor and make some form of allegation to get the trigger evidence for legal aid. And generally they do that on the advice of women's centres, because like certain northern cities that I've lived in, there's actually very, very, very low cost legal advice, or free legal advice, given at women's centres, that's funded by the taxpayer, or through the local authorities. But there's nothing like that for men. Men either get the citizens' advice, or they get a helpline that's not manned 24 hours a day, or they get to pay for a solicitor, the privilege of paying many thousands of pounds for a solicitor. So what tends to happen is, and I think the most common route is, the woman will say, well, I don't want to see him anymore. I don't want contact from him. And, I don't feel safe. So what happens then? A non-molestation order will be applied for, and usually granted ex parte, which means without the man present to give his version of events. That alone could signal domestic abuse, in the sense of, because a non-molestation order has been granted against him, she gets the legal aid for 2 years, and then they will advance the argument of domestic abuse. Doesn't matter whether it's true or not, they will advance that argument. Meanwhile, he won't be entitled to legal aid, and they will continue to say, oh, well, there's domestic abuse now, because mum has been granted a non-molestation order, so actually he shouldn't see his children. And there's no due process there. If an order is granted ex parte, and this has happened to me, if an order is granted ex parte, you do get a hearing, but if you can't afford representation, you have to litigate it yourself. And more often than not, a judge will just grant it anyway, because they're not going to take the risk. They're not going to take the risk that they don't grant it, and that order turns out to be the one where they don't grant it, and you turn out to be some sort of psycho. So unfortunately, it is a bureaucratic sort of nail in the coffin, and it just gets progressively worse. So my concerns are that this is going to be abused in the same way that LASPO was, because when I did the research, when I was at university, domestic abuse was actually on a downward trend, but applications when LASPO came in were on an upward trend. Applications for non-molestation orders were on an upward trend, and significantly. So I think it was like 200% or something like that. That applications for non-molestation orders went up by in the years after LASPO, which is just ridiculous. There was no other change at the time, but all of a sudden all these non-molestation orders were being applied for. So when you remove the presumption of contact, you put in one parent or the other, but I'm going to say majority of the time it's going to be dad, because I've been in the system for 12 years as a dad. self-litigating, it puts dad at a significant disadvantage, and really, more needs to be thought about before this is brought to pass, because I think it's going to cause a lot of harm to men, and we already have a very, very high male suicide rate, and that's only going to increase if they're taken away from the children. But it's also going to cause harm to children who presumably love the fathers. They might not, have very emotionally stable fathers, but that's something that men themselves actually need to address. If we're going to have a completely equal society, we also need to keep working towards positive ways for men to express themselves, and actually help men that are struggling to actually express themselves in healthy ways, not just stigmatize them and say, you're abusive, you can't see your child, because that's part of the problem. The other thing as well is, I think it's going to do an enormous amount of damage to women, because just thinking about the history of women's fight for equality, part of the problem was they wanted to get out and work, and get out and earn, and get out and do everything that men did. But this effectively ties them back to the kitchen sink, because there's not that shared parenting. They're now effectively saying, well, as women, we want to do all the parenting, we want to go out and get a job, and we want to keep the home. Well, how do they imagine that's going to work then? Because you got to keep the home and pay the bills and look after the child, of which for the first few years, fine, your bills are going to be covered by the DWP, but after that, you're on your own, effectively. I mean, you might get some maintenance, you might get some child benefit, but how are you going to manage a career when other women's campaigns say women already get paid less, and they're stigmatized when they have children, so they don't get as many hours, and women prefer part-time hours? It just doesn't. The math to me just isn't mathing. It seems as though this is a step backwards, and actually, there are going to be a lot of women that are celebrating this and saying, "Yeah, great, we're sticking it to the men. Sisters are doing it for themselves, whatever." And it just doesn't seem actually this is a positive step, because what is this going to do for men, in the sense of, is this really a step forward for women in the fight for equality, or is this a detriment for men? Well, fine, you could argue they don't get to see the children, but they get to walk away effectively scot-free, right? It's a few £100 in maintenance, let's say, a month, if that, because I've heard cases where there are some blokes that pay £7 a week, so it's not a lot. It's £28 a month, right? So £28 a month versus having contact, buying gifts, paying out for fuel and all, etc., clothes and whatever else, getting rinsed at bloody Disney and, the cinema and Alton Towers and wherever else, £28 a month is a bloody bargain, isn't it? If we're gonna be so emotionless about it, I think that's a good deal for men, really. But parenting and relationships shouldn't be so cold. We really do need to rethink how all this is done, because a lot of societal damage is going to be done if we carry on this trend. And I would argue women need to think about what it is that they actually want, because at the moment it seems to me, Women's Aid and activists like Charlotte Proudman are sort of telling women what they want. There's a lot of hurt women in the UK at the moment, in the West, but in particular in the UK, who are sort of bimbling along, believing everything that Women's Aid and these popular activists say, because they are in positions of power. And you have to question, well, are they doing it because they genuinely believe that they're doing something good? Or are they doing it because it benefits them financially? And, in 2010, it was only a few £1 million that was being pumped into, the refuges and the women's groups. But now it's close to like £500 million. That's a significant increase that's come from taxpayer funds. So I imagine there are lots and lots and lots and lots of little ways to make money off that. And it's probably not something that they want to give up. And it's probably not dripping down to, Becky from, the council estate, or, I don't know, Jenny from, middle of the road, that works 2 jobs, that has problems with her ex, that, still feels hurt. It's probably not dripping down to her either, to be honest. She just sees herself in the issues that they're raising, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're raising them for the right reasons. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of where my concerns are, because I think the legislation as proposed is going to cause a lot of damage, and I don't think it's beneficial for men. I don't think it's beneficial for women, and I certainly don't think it's beneficial for children. I don't want to go too much into my own case, because there's still things going on there. But needless to say, there are emotional issues that have cropped up purely by the children not having as much contact as they should have. Not necessarily because of abuse or whatever, but it's not having that contact that they should have had that's caused issues. And so, I think if we continue down this line, we are going to have a generation of children that are so emotionally damaged that we're only going to be able to blame ourselves. It's kind of like the blind leading the blind, or the wounded leading the wounded hurting the wounded, or that doesn't really work, does it? The wounded hurting others, because that's all they know. And I think the analogies I gave before, show why. I mean, the reason for the women seeing themselves in the feminist movement is because of the hurt. They feel vulnerable. That's why they're easily led down this path. And it's the same for men. A lot of people sort of say, oh, well, the incels or whatever. Right. Well, there's a reason for that. Because the hurt, shock horror, men aren't made of metal, like they have feelings, and they're deeply hurt. A lot of men don't know how to express themselves. They might have had abusive parents. They might have had, especially mothers. A lot of people don't like to admit this, but mothers. It's not the fathers that we need to worry about. Especially, a lot of mothers can be very emotionally and psychologically abusive. And then we end up with men that are like incels. So, we need to figure that out. But anyway, it turned into more of a rant about society and emotions rather than it did the legislation. But my key takeaway points would be: this is bad. This is bad legislation because the definition is too wide. The definition of domestic abuse is too wide. Humans act on the self-interest, so there are going to be false allegations. There's not really, that I've seen, a good test for that at the moment, and judges don't really like to infer that. LASPO provides a good motive to make false allegations, because you get a solicitor for free. And, again, for all the reasons I've just covered in terms of putting women back and being a disadvantage to men, etc., I think it's going to have a negative impact on society. So that's basically what my position is. I am going to research it a bit more and articulate my thoughts a bit clearer in writing. I find I always do articulate myself better in writing than I perhaps do verbally. Don't know why that is, but there we are. So I'll post my blog on my website, which is love.edwardcharle.es. Perhaps not the best domain in the world, but there you are. There's loads of other stuff on there you can go and have a look at. And if you want to get in touch, just find my email, I guess, or contact me on LinkedIn. Excuse me, that's coffee repeating on me. Lovely. Find my email. Anybody that knows how to Google can probably find it. So, it's not difficult. Anyway, I'll leave it there. And I appreciate my my username on YouTube is Eddie the Tech Guy, but this is another topic that I have a vast interest in, and don't have to stick to one topic, I guess. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one.